Welcome back, everyone, to Random's Thoughts, Runestrike Ruminations Edition. We're actually doing this live on the Twitch channel right now, so we may have some Twitch chat interaction and responses to the patch notes that were revealed, well, at the time of this recording, a few hours ago. Now, they actually went through some changes in the time that they were mentioned this morning, and then before the show, and now during the show. So there could be more notes right now in Discord that I'm not aware of. If you want to follow along, absolutely go hit up the official Runestrike Discord. But we're going to talk about the proposed changes as they are now, and I have it, as you can see up there in the corner, potential patch. And the reason I say that is we know that there is a patch coming. I believe the date stated was December 20th. So about a week from now at the time of this recording. But we don't know exactly what will end up making the patch, what's going to get left on the cutting room floor. And we already know that there are a number of things that are coming down the pipe that are not going to be included in this patch. It was alluded to previously that this was a crucial balance patch, a required one, something that had to happen. And I want to talk about the changes because there's a variety of things going on. Now, I wanted to do a whole thing, get the old cards up and all that kind of stuff, but I'll be honest with you, real life intervened. It happens sometimes. So we're going to go through the patch notes and talk about everything just, person to person. So we're going to get the marker up there so we know what we're talking about. So first one up, and the highlights are not mine. The highlights are from the notes. I literally right-clicked and copied image from the official Runestrike Discord so that we could talk about it. So the first change up is Zekon's A1. The torture spell that puts in your opponent's hand now reads, you take 1 damage and your opponent restores 1 health, with a keep of you take 1 damage. So the difference here is that if you play the torture, it's going to give your opponent a health as well, as opposed to just strictly damaging you. The intent, as pointed out by the devs, is to create a tension so that there is a decision point of whether you want to keep it, whether you want to play it, or what the case is. Overall, I don't know that I care. I don't think that any deck that was today trying to utilize something other than A1 is now going to be enticed to expend blood on not A1. I think most of the time in the Zekon builds that I've been playing myself, I've been focused on A2 or A3, primarily A3, but obviously A2 with any corruption effect is super powerful. Now that I have this at my disposal, I'm pretty sure I'm still just going to A2 and A3. Now, if you were focused on A1, sure, you can definitely, you get a boost here, you get a buff. I don't think I'm really enticed to move into A1. I'm going to have to try it out. It's a very subtle change, and maybe it's going to be super impactful, but I don't feel that when I was trying way back when, right after the Zekon changes, to make a A1 focused deck work, that this is the reason that I was short a couple life here or there, and then that's why I ended up winning or losing games. It really just was not impactful enough. Now, there's an argument that, oh, well, people are going to hold on to the tortures because they don't want to give you life. I think the 1 life is insignificant enough that your opponent's just going to play the torture. Are there games that are going to be decided because you gained 1 to 4 life over the course of a game that you would not have otherwise because your opponent played those tortures? Yes. Is it going to be a significant amount of games, or do I expect it to be a significant amount of games? Because obviously maybe it will be. Probably not. So I'm fine with this. Like sure. We have a Zekon change. That's basically the way I'm looking at it. Next up is Sandworm. So Sandworm has been all the rage, has been the talk of the town, among others, and we'll get to those later, and is now getting a change so that the dive, if you choose digest or dive, if you choose dive, the one that puts it back into your hand, it now reads, return this to your hand, the Sandworm, of course. It keeps its existing stats and costs 1 mana. So it goes from 0 mana to 1 mana, which kind of touches on something that I've been harping about over several different streams and recordings and what have you. 0 cost in any game is very, very dangerous. Whether you actually have a literal goose egg in the corner for what the cost of the card is, or you manage to reduce a cost down to 0. Either way, it presents a whole bunch of problems and is super dangerous in the world of card games. So I'm okay with this. The question is, does it make a significant enough change? I don't know. And the reason I say that is I really think most of the power is locked up in Ogma's A3, which is one of the things that's not on this list notably, but is intended to be changed at some point. We did get that mentioned from the devs. But again, just like these patch notes over here, you have to take that with a grain of salt. We don't want to hold them to that because it isn't officially out there. And they may change their mind. They may decide to go a different direction. You know, things change. So as far as Sandworm goes, I am happy that they are eliminating a lot of effects, cards, whatever, that cost 0. But I don't think that this really materially changes things. I mean, realistically, if the combo that people have been complaining about is I'm eating a bunch of stuff and then I'm just annihilating you in one turn, going from 0 to 1 in this sort of play pattern probably isn't going to make too much of a difference. Yes, again, just like the last change, there are going to be scenarios where previously you could have ate up your whole board. Now you eat up board -1 or something. But a lot of it's later stage in the game. It's in a positive direction. I don't know if it's necessarily going to 100%. I'm not real confident that it's going to 100% address the particular pain point in question, but it is moving in the right direction, so that's definitely a positive. It won't matter because of another change to another card now as well, since you're comboing it together. That's the other one. Yeah, we didn't get that far yet, Beard. I think I know which one you're talking about, but we'll come back to this one when there's another card on this list, which if you're cheating and jumping ahead, you may already know. Next up is, yep, you do, yeah. All right, so the next one up is Salem's Burning Sands and Firestorm in particular. So Firestorm now reads Occupy. Minions have 1 power and strike your minions, or strike minions your opponent controls take 1 damage. So it still keeps the strike ability. It only goes to 1 power. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, was it a strike or was it just an attack ability? We're doing this live because it's more fun that way. I'm trying to find this real quick. Now, in either case, no, I can't find that real quick. So chat will have to correct me as I'm going through. I mean, the power reduction is very important. Like, look, +3 on this was way too strong. You thought it was strike before. I think strike is what it was, but I second guessed myself there. That's why I was trying to pull it up real quick. But I'm concerned, honestly, about the other half of the power, not Firestorm, the other storm, because the attack reduction, I think, was just waiting in the wings because people were so enamored with, admittedly and justifiably, the high power level of Firestorm. As it was put to me offline in a DM, you're making an enchantment desperate charge, kind of. And that's, when put in that context, yes, it's not really even remotely the same, but when put in that context, the amount of power that you're getting, and again, even there, it was 4 versus 3, not the same, but it kind of gets the gears turning and maybe puts into context exactly what we're looking at. Like, that's a very powerful buff. You can't ignore that if your opponent's just slamming minions there. And if you try to block, well, guess what? That thing's buffed up enough that it's probably eating anything anyway. Now, enchantments are a unique beast because they provide this continual value that can't really be interacted with. The enchantment itself can't be interacted with. It's just the thing that's on it, basically. So they have to be power level wise weaker than they would if they were a quote unquote regular card. But this is a blood ability. It's an enchantment. Both effects are really strong. Yeah. Yes, they are strike playing a match for Salem right now. All right. Awesome. Thank you, Beard. I think this is also positive. I think there's probably something that needs to be done with Salem otherwise. Like, I think the blood cost could be increased. I think the other half of Burning Sands needs to be addressed as well. But again, we're moving in the right direction. These are worthwhile changes. We just may need to go a little bit farther. So the next one up is Dawn's Eclipse. Just straight up gets nerfed, goes to 6 blood. Again, this one so far out of all of them I'm happiest with because I think that's both warranted. Think not too long ago we had both it cost 5 and it hit both sides of the board. Now you have to choose which side of the board and it costs 6. I think this is justified. I think Dawn will probably still be okay. We'll have to see because this is a large number of changes on all of this. So there's a number of things that are going on, and we won't know exactly how it plays out until we get it in our hands. But Dawn's abilities are good enough. While we are getting another change to a Dawn, essentially a Dawn stamped card, it's not literally Dawn stamped, but you'll understand when we get there. She's still going to be able to do very powerful things. So I think Dawn is going to be fine. I actually believe that a number of other blood abilities should cost 6. I've been on record before, and I'm going to say it again. I think just about, if not all, blood abilities in the game could stand to have their blood cost increase by 1, just blanket 1. And then go from there and see if they need further nerfs, which is likely the case in a number of scenarios. So for here, like I said, I think this change is positive, and I think it will help out. In conjunction with a later change that we're going to talk about, I hope that this opens up some other options. But before we get there, we're going to talk about Morlich's Unholy Sacrifice. So this one and the next one kind of go together. Basically, his A2 and his A3 get swapped. His former A2, which is now A3, Unholy Sacrifice, the one where you pop one of your minions to deal damage equal to its attack to your opponent's board, is now A3 and it costs 4 blood. Feast of the Dead, which was the enchantment for Morlich, gets moved to A2 and now costs 3 blood. Now, realistically, and a number of people pointed this out, myself included, the enchantment is virtually irrelevant. I don't think this necessarily does anything to change that. I think that Morlich is still 100% focused on Unholy Sacrifice, and you just don't care. I would much prefer that this change get moved to something like destroy one of your minions, it always deals 2 damage, or always deals 3 damage. Pick a number, something like that. I think it's scaling with the attack is very dangerous. I think the whole point is that you're trying to generate value out of your minions dying, not just from the ability, but utilizing their berry abilities. And it gives you an outlet for that. I mean, to be honest, in plenty of other games, and Runestrike obviously is not those other games, but if you had the ability to just destroy one of your own guys at will, that's good enough flat, no extra ability. And that's not counting the fact that you would, in those games, pay resources for that. In Runestrike, you're paying blood, which, as pointed out by one of the devs, you have nothing else to spend blood on. There are a couple cards that cost it, but realistically, you're spending them on blood abilities. So it doesn't matter. You have this whole other resource column, pillar, bucket, whatever, that all the blood is going into, and the only time you're reaching in is to play these abilities. So you could probably get away with Unholy Sacrifice just doing nothing. That might be a little extreme given the current environment, but I could see it moving towards that long term. And honestly, I think that Morlich is one of those decks that people just don't talk about for some reason. They're always enamored with a number of other things. And I think that it is problematic, but it would cause problems for Morlich in particular if you were to change it to what I'm proposing and other things don't give. Don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting just nerf it and then call it a day and everything's fine. There are other parts of the puzzle and other things that would have to come into play. Nothing exists in just a vacuum. However, I've always had a problem with Unholy Sacrifice. I think that it's too good. I still think that the new A2, former A3 is not good enough. I'm hoping that my mind will be changed when we see it. So after Morlich, we have Freya. Freya's health has gone from 6 to 4. Now, this would have been more significant not that long ago when Sickle Stalker still cost 4, and then you could pop it immediately. But it does allow Freya to be removed by a number of different things. You can't just slam it even in front of a 2-cost minion, because it'll eventually trade on its own. Because if you put it in front of something that was already in play, it gets the first attack. Freya attacks back. Then that thing attacks Freya again and removes her. So you have to play her a little more cautiously. Plus, Sickle Stalker is still around and can single-handedly remove it. Or even Morlich, who we previously mentioned. There are a number of different ways to deal 4. That's an amount of damage that is, I don't want to say trivial, but it's attainable by a number of different avenues without jumping through too many hoops. I mean, you could run Mastodon and then a blood ability. You can run Mastodon and another card. You know, you can deal with it readily. And I think this is good. I don't know that it necessarily had to go from 6 to 4. It's tough because my biggest thing for modifying Freya is that you can transmute her out early. If you transmute her out and drop her on, turn 2, it's very difficult for your opponent to come back because it's almost impossible for them to remove it unless they're chaos. And then even if they do, it really depends on when they do it. How many cards have you gotten for free off Freya? What cards have you gotten? And how much effort did your opponent have to put in to try and remove it? If they had to spend 3 cards to kill Freya, it doesn't matter that you only got 1 out of it. You're still up by an enormous amount. So now they have to invest less cards. I really do like this change. I'm not sure if it necessarily needed to go this low, but I'll trust the team on this and see where it ends up. So the next one up is Siren, which is also a card that has been oft maligned by the community. That there's a number of people that have put forth a lot of complaints about Siren. And I can understand that if you have a limited collection or if you're trying to run something that we'll say is off meta. Siren can certainly pose an issue. An uncontested Siren or a somehow protected Siren can lock you out of the game. Dropping it from 5 to 4 health means, again, Sickle Stalker's one-shot it. You have all these other cards that can suddenly engage with it that might not have been able to previously, where you can just cleanly remove it without having to I got to leave it at 1, and then your opponent does thing. Or you can, the Evangelist players that can protect it, or somebody puts Resurrect on it, or whatever the case is. And then you can only deal with it once, but you can't deal with the follow-up. And again, you have to invest 7 cards to remove this thing, or just try and go face and race it, which isn't really viable for a lot of builds. I think it is good. It is a huge frustration point for the community, obviously. I don't know. I haven't had too many problems personally with Siren playing against it. I don't think I even own it, so I haven't played it. This is one of those cards that I think there's always going to be cards in this bucket, this role, where they are intensely frustrating to play against if your opponent slams them because they're powerful and they can take over a game. There's always going to be a card like that, or cards like that, or interactions like that, or decks like that. And part of the game is just, well, that's the meta right now, and it will shift either by players' actions, by picking up new builds, picking up new decks, adapting, or because of the season structure, the meta is constantly shifting because we're always just that far away from getting more cards, which is going to upend everything all over again. I don't know about this one. I'm sure the team looked at this and said that the numbers support it, that either Siren had an unpleasantly high win rate or just everybody's so up in arms about it. I think there's going to be a lot of people happy with this change. I don't know that it was necessary, but it is what it is. So after that, we have Harvest Night. So this one's been the talk of the town, and you'll notice that we are not seeing any Salem changes to A1. Why does that matter? Well, if you've been living under a rock, there is an infinite combo where Salem can generate infinite blood and then kill you via divine triggers. Basically, you use Spirit Barricade and then either Mirror or 2 Harvest Nights, and you hit your Spirit Barricade with your A1. And if you have a minion with divine in play, you're getting your blood back every time you kill your Spirit Barricade. It creates new barricades, and then you just keep doing that while the Divine trigger's going and 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 going, and then you end your opponent. Harvest Night, the new wording, only triggers when enemy minions die, which means that that goes right out the window. Now, I've seen Harvest Night in a number of builds aside from that prior to the Sailing combo, and I expect that it's going to appear in those same builds still. It clearly is going to be weaker just across the board because you're not going to get as many activations. You can't rely on, oh, well, my minions are going to die on the following combat, or I'm going to do some other thing that's going to deal a bunch of damage to everything, so I'll scoop up some more blood that way. I think this is more what Harvest Night was intended to do. And I can agree with this change. It breaks the combo. I think there are probably other things that would need to be done with it because from now on, that sailing loop is going to be in the back of everyone's head. So it's going to have to be at the front of the developers' heads because there's always going to be somebody going, well, does this release re-enable that combo? Does this let me redo that? Because that's how card games work. But I agree with this Harvest Night change. I think this is a positive one. After Harvest Night, we have Ambush, which is one that we were foreshadowing earlier. Ambush, sorry, getting a little dry here. Ambush now reads, target friendly minion gains +1 power and lethal. Really, none of the other powers matter. It's the lack of a specific keyword, the most important keyword, and that's Blitz. The lack of Blitz on this thing probably eliminates it from a variety of decks. I'll be honest, I have no idea what deck wants this now. Like, at all. If you're looking for removal, no one will play this card now. I agree, Beard. I don't see any deck that plays this. Now, I don't have a problem with that in general. It's problematic from the standpoint of just making quote-unquote unplayable cards. Obviously, you could literally play it. But when a card gamer is talking about unplayable, we're not talking about, yes, it's banned, so therefore, it's unplayable. We're talking about there's no reason to put this in a deck. And I can't think of a single deck that would ever want this card now. Like, I can't even think of a circumstance where you would want it. Because pretty much at any point, you would much rather have a Blitz minion, an actual removal card, or just about anything else. Which, as I started out with, I'm fine with, because the only time that we really saw it was in Laura to make Awakened Earth angry and fast and speedy, which I guess that's kind of redundant, but blitzy and speedy, I guess. We'll go with that. And then you see it in the Ogma combo, which we were talking about earlier with Sandworm. Both of which you just had this enormous monster, you slam it on the table and you go, pow, we're going to win before you do anything. Or you have the ability to respond. Or just do such an enormous set of damage, huge chunk, and that gives us the leverage we need. I don't necessarily have a problem with that sort of game plan existing, but obviously the devs do. Nope, should have just increased the cost on it to 4 or 5. I would agree, Beard. So if we assume, and I was talking about this, I think, last stream, if we assume that, lethal is 1 mana, if you take the cost of a minion, whatever you figure out the mana to stats ratio is, and then every positive ability is 1 mana, let's say, you add each of 1 mana on for each of the additional abilities. So lethal is 1. Blitz is at least 2 or 3. Ambush itself only costs 2, so immediately it's undercosted. Immediately. I could easily see it being 4 or 5 because of all these reasons, and then just say, okay, you can do your thing, but it limits the scope of what it can interact with unless you set up, I guess tribal elders or multiple Awakened Earth or, whatever. In which case, those multiple Awakened Earth probably are not getting ambushed. I think increasing the cost would have been better here, but I can respect the decision to just say, we're not doing it. We're not dealing with it because it's not worth it. So, honestly, I think Ambush is dead, but I'm okay with that. Aura of Might. So Aura of Might is our next change. Aura of Might just straight up now costs 4 mana. So I'm pausing a bit because I'm trying to think I just want to double check, like, it previously cost 2. I just wanted to make sure. This is from the new season. Your minions gain divine. This gains +1/+1. Now, we had talked about this briefly in, not tonight, but in general. Talked about it briefly in the Salem combo deck as a potential finisher. Ultimately, Flamewalker is better because it's doing damage, it's actively progressing it. You don't need yet another card to then clear the way for your minions to get through, although ultimately, since it gives it to all of your minions, some of them will probably get through and it doesn't matter. You just grow them to inordinate proportions and then just end the game. However, I haven't seen it anywhere else, like at all. So I don't know exactly where this is coming in or why this is happening. I could definitely see it being abusive because it's a board-wide thing. You do get an enormous amount of stats. Is this too strong at 2? I guess. I mean, I'm fine with it costing 4. I have a hard time seeing that it's going to be played at 4. I mean, maybe it is, because this is one of those weird things where you play it at 4, you activate, say, a 2-cost blood ability. You also activate a 3-cost blood ability, get +2/+2 across the board, and then next turn play Bylight's Grace, and then give another +1/+1, and now your team has +3/+3, the 2 previous turn and 1 now, and all of a sudden your opponent's never going to get back in the game. I guess. This one kind of caught me off guard. I was not expecting a change to this, but again, I'm sure it's fine. The next one, however, Backstab. Deal 2 damage to target undamaged minion. If it dies, add a Backstab to your hand at end of turn. Now, Backstab we've spent a lot of time talking about, and most of it was that it was negative about Backstab. Like, Backstab was a bad thing. This is a nerf to Backstab, which is good. However, I think that it would be nice. Like, there are other parts of this. So I like the interaction with Dawn. I think it's cool and unique. I think just that Backstab is too good. This will not allow somebody to just annihilate your board in one turn. It's now going to take them multiple turns. So it's a significant nerf. I still think Backstab is obviously an auto-include in Dawn, because between Cling to Life and A2 and likely other effects down the road, you're still going to be able to just remove things on a whim. And for very little investment comparatively. Like, it's 3 mana and 2 cards, or 4 blood and a card. You may have already done something with the Backstab. It could always be pointed at something just to deal 2 damage to it. The card is still very powerful. I think this slows it down a lot. In conjunction with the Lich change, I still think aggro, traditional curve-based aggro, where I play a 1-drop on 1, a 2-drop on 2, a 3-drop on 3, or, a 2-drop and a 1-drop, that sort of thing, is still in a rough spot, because Backstab A still exists. It's still going to generate an enormous amount of card advantage, even if it's slowed down. Basically, if they hit the Backstab early, and it's against a deck that it's good against, it matters, but it doesn't really matter. You're still going to annihilate them. I don't know. It definitely nerfs it. I don't think it went far enough. It's funny, Backstab brought Cling to Life to being put into decks, but as you just said, it slows it down a lot. Yeah, I mean, it will slow it down, but picture this scenario. If you play, like, the Ogma deck that I usually play, and I play a Blade Dancer on 2, and you have Backstab, you're going to Backstab it, and nothing has changed. So my play pattern now is, I'm up against Dawn, I need to play multiple things in a turn, because otherwise you're just going to Backstab them to death. That means that I'm not playing anything until, like, turn 4. And they're still backstabbable. I mean, ignoring blood ability investment or rampage or other things. Like, those could have been done previously. So now I'm going to go, like, Blade Dancer thing, whatever. One of them's still going to die, and I've given you 3 turns to do whatever. Even if it's just literally nothing. You've had 3 turns of no pressure. So while I do think that this is helpful, I don't think it goes far enough, and similar to some of these other changes, I'd be fine if Backstab just got crippled. Or if it's going to exist, which is also fine, and that goes for everything. Whatever the devs want to do, I'm going to say I don't care, but that's not intended to be like, oh, well, I don't care. I don't care what they do. It's intended that, like, look, do whichever you want. It's your game, and design it how you want it. I will then decide if I'm enjoying playing it, and I could see where it would be enjoyable doing some of these things, or other options. We can always debate about which would be better or worse. Like, those are going to be subjective and person to person depending on what they want to do. But it's whether the cohesive whole works. And I think that if Backstab is going to continue to exist, a number of other boxes need to be checked. Namely, you need more X3s early in the game, like turn 1, turn 2 X3s. And you need other things that will be somehow resilient to this sort of effect, so that it's not just, oh, I get blown out. It's, oh, I'm playing against Dawn, I need to mulligan for this thing. And then if I don't find it, I need to adjust my play pattern, so that way you kind of have a chance. I don't think there's a significant change for the aggressive decks, which realistically don't really exist, with respect to Backstab. It will change the play pattern against more mid-range and control things, where you can't just go cling that, A2 that, do something else, backstab, 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 clear your board, regardless of the size. That is very important. And it's going to make Dawn work, which is where I think a lot of this change is more focused. I think Backstab, regardless, is if it's a card that comes back and it deals 2, it's probably going to crap on aggro. Like, it just doesn't matter. Regardless of how it functions, unless they drastically rework it, I don't think there's much way for it to not demolish aggro, which is my biggest problem with it, because I think aggro would help keep some of these other things in check. Well, not necessarily like the Dawn deck, but it would maybe fight some of these ramp decks and some of these Dirtle decks that are running rampant. So, bottom line, Backstab, good change, but I think there's other problems with it. So next up is Chosen One, which straight up goes from 5 mana, I believe, to 6. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. Like I said, today was a real-life challenging day, so you'll have to forgive me a little bit. Costing 6 mana, I mean, this card, I kind of was down on it when it was first revealed, mostly because I didn't know what the abilities it could assign are. Once we learned what they were, its stock went right up. And as you'd imagine, you know, if you played Runestrike and you played against a light champion, you've probably seen Chosen One come up. For all the reasons that we were talking about Lich having the ability to pop their own guys, you can do that with this. You can board fill. You can draw a bunch of cards. You can give things protected or resurrect or buffs or whatever. You can do a variety of different things, and it's all really powerful. I can definitely get behind this one changing. It impacts what you can do on the same turn, so you can't necessarily do the same things. It was 5. Okay, thank you, chat. You can chain, like, you can't necessarily, it's not just how early in the game you can do it. It's also, oh, well, if I Chosen One on turn 10, I used to be able to play another 5-drop. Now I have to do a 4. What does that change? Well, it could be a few different things, and it really is going to depend on the deck. It's obviously a nerf. I can get behind it. Like, this is a super powerful card. Hey, RD, what's good? All right, so next one up, our penultimate change, is Desperate Charge now reads target friendly minion and adjacent minions get +4 power until end of your turn, then reduce their health to 1 at the end of your turn. I mentioned this on multiple occasions. Like, the second half of this card is irrelevant. The game ends, like, when you Desperate Charge. It's decided one way or the other. Most of the time, Desperate Charge is played in decks where those minions are like 2 health anyway, so who cares? The only time it really comes up is I Iron Bold, I Mindless Raider, that sort of thing. Occasionally, there'll be something else, but look, that it doesn't matter for the most part. The fact that it now has to target something and then adjacent minions is pretty significant because your opponent's blocking. You can't just go, oh, I'll Longship Raid and then next turn play it in 1, 3, and 5, double Desperate Charge, get in. Odds are your opponent has at least a blocker, probably 2, maybe 3. And therefore, you won't necessarily just be slamming face. This is a pretty significant change. Personally, I would rather have seen it go to like 5 cost, 6 cost, and go to 3 power. But I think this is a unique way to try and tackle the challenge without just doing the obvious thing. So to that, I have to commend the team that it's an interesting way to tackle it. It's going to be a challenge as we go through games and try and find out how much do those blockers matter. I expect it's probably going to result in 4 less damage each time. I expect you'll probably have 2 lanes that are open. But it does also, to the point about the developers finding a creative way to nerf the card without either making it unplayable or, just completely reworking it, is that the decisions about where your opponents block now matters. So if they decide to place their minions and it's just like, okay, well, all the lanes are open because you just Longship Raided. Now there is okay, well, I want to cover as many lanes as possible. So they might play in 2 and 4. Or if you already have minions, it's okay, well, I know that they probably have Desperate Charge. If I do this and they have this Blitz minion, it's going to result in 6 damage. But if I block this way, I take 8 or 12 or whatever. There's going to be a little bit more in the mind game sense for how that's going to get set up. I expect it'll get figured out relatively quickly, or it's going to be relatively obvious every time you do it. But ultimately, this does just nerf Desperate Charge, which I think is absolutely needed. Desperate Charge is a card that is just plainly too powerful, or at least it was. We'll see how it turns out after this. So speaking of Longship Raid, this is our last change that is on the list. And again, as I said at the top, there were a number of changes that were alluded to, either explicitly or just implied by the devs, aside from these, that are not going to make it into this patch, or maybe they will. This is all kind of up in the air. I'm going to try and get this up as quickly as I can because the patch is coming right around the corner. So Longship Raid now reads, add 3 Viking Raider runes to your hand. They cost 1 mana. So similar to what we saw earlier with Sandworm, they're trying to eliminate these 0-cost cards, which is imperative. In my opinion, that is one of the more dangerous things that any card game can have, is just free resources, essentially. Cards that are free that, even if they have a somewhat innocuous effect, we saw way back with Top Shot's Evangelist deck, it didn't matter. As long as the cards were free, they were just playing and then generating, well, they were pouring gas in the tank for the engine. In this case, Longship Raid, for me, typically was played as a precursor to the aforementioned Desperate Charge. So you're just sitting on a bunch of Vikings, and then you just plop them out there and Desperate Charge your opponent into oblivion. That's not going to work any longer. Similarly, you can't do the old Tribal Elder into Longship Raid into Desperate Charge play, because now the math is going to get screwed up a little bit because of the Vikings. I mean, you can still do those things, but it's going to change the resource requirements on any given turn. I think this is valuable. I think Longship Raid was seemingly underrated by the community overall, but it was a very powerful card. I expect it'll still get used, but we're now looking at multiple hits to a variety of aggressive decks. We'll have to see how that works out. Get rid of the pointer there. So, overall thoughts on this patch. I think there are some hits. I think there are a number of misses. I think that there are some that are in the middle, but moving in the right direction. So if it was like on a scale 1 to 10, 1 being a bad change, a 10 being this is absolutely, it's God's gift to balance changes, they would be like a 6. So it's like, yes, this is positive, but more could be done, or done in a different direction, or, we're waiting on the second half of something, that sort of stuff. I think that this is worthwhile. Meta-wise, we were seeing a lot of Salem combo. Well, maybe not a lot. It's really apparently one person, Doctor, running it, just dominating everybody with it. I don't know how many other people are running it. Ogma combos. What's going to happen after this patch? It's tough to predict. I could see a lot of people defaulting back to like the Magus builds, the Magus ramp builds, although we saw Odin and Horus get nerfed in a previous patch. You know, with any of the Dirtle decks that were getting pushed out by combo, which is a reason that the combo maybe should have been left alone, full disclosure. A lot of the Dirtle decks could make a resurgence because if there aren't very good aggro decks and the combo decks that didn't care what you were doing, they're just going to kill you, are gone. Now the Dirtle decks have a vacuum to fill. Therefore, like, the ramp decks can come back, that sort of thing. We'll have to see. I could see Dawn still sticking around. I think Ogma, again, another beating to the fair aggro versions. The heavy blitz leaning, like if you're just playing blitz.deck, you take a hit because of Desperate Charge, you take a hit possibly because of Longship Raid. That's kind of it. Obviously, the Laura decks that were trying to rely on Awakened Earth were nerfed before because of the Awakened Earth change, and now have an even less reason to be able to try and power out an Awakened Earth with Blitz, because Ambush got changed. There won't be as many stupid blowouts with an early Freya. There will still be some, because sometimes your opponent just can't deal with it, but there will be less because it's more easily dealt with. So I'm happy about that. We'll have to see if the Salem, you know, the Keeper Lock deck was addressed to some extent. I'm curious, A, does that come back? Or B, does Salem A3 Lock replace it? Because you can use the other half of Burning Sands to reduce your opponent's attack to really low levels. And I remember beating people running those sort of decks on ladder before this change, obviously. But they had some unique ideas, like running minions with speed. So that then it's, okay, it's -2 across your opponent's entire board. That's a significant change. Like that's a huge attack reduction. So there's a lot of potential there. I don't really anticipate Zcon A1 stuff suddenly getting a resurgence. I take that back. I'm sure people will try it, so there will be a resurgence of it, but I don't expect that it's going to be like, oh, well, this is suddenly the thing to play. I don't know. Overall, like I said, I'm happy with the patch. I think there are other things that need to be done, some of which the devs have talked about. I'm not sure when we're getting the next patch after this. I would imagine, because this is coming on the 20th, then season ends sometime in January. So, we'll see. The only issue I have is Ambush. Personally, I think it should have been target-friendly. Minion gains Bliss and help low to mid-range minions be more useful. Well, the problem is that the Blitz is the part of the card, the only part of the card that mattered. In its old incarnation, none of the other effects, yes. I mean, I'm hyperbolizing here, you know, card game hyperbole. When I say none of the other parts of the card matter, obviously there were scenarios that did. But Blitz was the primary purpose. So if it's going to be Blitz, like I was saying when we talked about that change, I think the card needs to cost 4 or 5. I don't think you can, and that's whether it has other text or not. And the reason for that is, like I said, you're playing the card strictly for that keyword. Everything else is a bonus. So unless they're going to put some other penalty on it, it's the Awakened Earth combos, it's Sandworm combos, even if they broke Awakened Earth and they break Sandworm, down the line there will be some other arbitrarily large thing that goes, well, if I have Blitz, I'm busted, and there you go. Yeah, it's a tough spot because I don't know what the intent for the card was originally. I mean, it thematically makes sense that you get Blitz, kind of. What they probably could have done is just remove the keyword and said, you can, play this on a minion, if that minion is opposing another minion, so like there's a minion in an opponent's minion in the lane, you attack this turn. Or like gain Blitz this turn if there's an opposing minion. So that, yes, you could still do silly stuff with like Iron Bowl or other attack again effects. But that kind of just reintroduces the same issue with Ogma A3. Laura kind of doesn't care because if you're able to blitz something big enough, the same issue comes back. And that's why I think if they just increase the cost, as it is now, like we said this earlier, I think the card is just basically unplayable. I have no idea when you would want Ambush, ever. Yes, there's going to be a scenario where you're losing a game. You're like, well, if I just had an Ambush, it's like, well, yes, but you probably would have lost the previous 9 games because you were drawing Ambush when you could have drawn a useful card. I don't know. I'm okay with a lot of these changes. I think ultimately my biggest complaint is I think more needs to be done. Now, I'm on record, and I'll say it again here. I do not feel balance is the biggest problem with Runestrike. I'm not sure it's the second or third biggest problem with Runestrike either. I think there are other things that need to be addressed first, priority-wise. But, again, small team, they only have limited resources, they're doing what they can, and there are balance things that need to be changed, including these. So, I'm fine with them doing it. I'm not like, oh, well, why are they doing balance changes instead of fixing this thing? Look, that's not how design works. It's just not. Plus, in most teams, it's broken up where, like, the balance guy is not doing UI stuff. I don't know if that's the case for the Runestrike team because I know they have a lot of overlap against small team, but point is that, you just because one person's doing one thing doesn't mean that they should be doing something else or qualified to do something else. In this case, I'll close it out with this and then move on, but I do like the patch. Like I said, I think other things need to be done. I'll probably have to redo my balance I definitely have to redo my balance document on suggestions because there's a bunch of things that are getting changed. So we'll have to see. I think this is a positive move forward. Obviously, I would have done things differently, but that's because I am not the team. So I have my own opinions and thoughts on how some of the stuff should shape up, and they are based on incomplete information. I think people need to keep that in mind as they suggest things, as they reply to this, or they talk about other things in the future. We do not have as much information as the dev team does. We also do not have the vision for the game that the dev team does, and that's okay. It's possible that their vision for the game is not something that you like, and that does not make it bad or wrong on either front. It's just simply different, and it's okay. And that can sometimes be a difficult thing to acknowledge and understand, especially in the moment where it's, oh, well, I'm really attached to a thing, and then they nerf the crap out of it. Or I'd love for this thing to work, but why do they keep they never give me any support to make this idea work? It happens. There aren't enough resources to go around to do everything all the time. So the main thing that I would leave everybody with as we close this out is that be reasonable about this. Think about it. Try and understand that there are reasons why the devs have chosen to go the route they do. And I even call that, like, I disagree with a lot of these things or had different thoughts on how these things should have been addressed. I'm still going to play Runestrike. Like, they don't have to bow to my will kind of thing. And it's the same for anybody else. So I'm just putting that out there. But that'll do it for this time. So as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.